While the mainstream news cycle fixates on the immediate grief of the latest casualties in Jordan and the tit-for-tat exchanges of drones and missiles across the Middle East, the surface-level reporting completely misses the deeper structural mechanics of what is unfolding. When we look past the emotional sound bites and the political posturing in Washington, we are witnessing a systemic realignment of power across Eurasia. What is happening between the United States and Iran is not merely a localized security crisis or a spontaneous flare-up. It is the violent, grinding continuation of a structural rupture that has been decades in the making, touching upon the security of global energy routes, the integrity of regional alliances, and the shifting boundaries of American global hegemony. To understand why American service members are once again dying in desert outposts like those in Jordan, we have to strip away the illusion that this conflict began with the most recent escalation or even with the events of late 2023. Mainstream broadcasts treat these incidents as isolated tragedies, but from a strategic standpoint, they are symptoms of a profound historical deadlock for over 4 decades. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the geopolitical architecture of the Persian Gulf has been defined by an unresolvable contradiction. Washington has sought to maintain an architecture of primacy in the Middle East, guaranteeing the flow of hydrocarbons and protecting key partners while relying on a mix of economic sanctions and naval dominance to keep regional challenges in check. Iran, on the other hand, viewing its security through an existential lens, built a doctrine of forward defense, a network of allied militias, missile capabilities, and asymmetric deterrence designed to push American power back across the water. When analysts on television debate whether diplomacy can succeed or whether the United States must return to major kinetic operations, they are usually trapped inside a false binary. They frame the choice as a simple preference between war and peace, as if statecraft were a switch that could be flipped back and forth. But history tells us that great power friction rarely resolves through sudden conversions of good faith. Iran's posture is not born out of temporary stubbornness or bad faith negotiations alone. It is the core defensive strategy of a regime that calculates its survival on its ability to impose costs on American net forces. Every time Washington responds with airstrikes against logistics nodes or maritime capabilities, and every time Tehran retaliates through regional proxies or direct missile volleys targeting infrastructure in the Gulf, both nations are locked into an escalatory ladder that neither side has found a reliable off-ramp to exit. The economic reality underlying this chess game is equally critical and far too rarely discussed with the sobriety it requires. The security of the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Persian Gulf is the invisible circulatory system of the global economy. When strikes hit desalination plants, oil facilities in Kuwait, or transport networks near southern Iranian ports, the shock waves are felt far beyond the Middle East. Energy markets remain hypersensitive, and every escalation forces a subtle reassessment of risk by major global importers, particularly Asian economies that rely heavily on Gulf energy flows. Yet, while Washington focuses heavily on kinetic containment, other global actors like Beijing watch carefully, calculating the long-term sustainability of American commitments in a theater that increasingly drains strategic bandwidth away from primary peer competition. The United States finds itself trapped in a classic imperial dilemma. The moment it scales back its presence, its credibility and regional architecture collapse. The moment it digs in, it suffers a slow bleed of blood and treasure in protracted stalemates. This brings us to the core illusion, peddled by political commentators who argue that pure military strength or expanded sanctions will neatly resolve the crisis. Power in the modern international system is no longer measured solely by the capacity to destroy infrastructure or deliver punitive strikes. If that were true, decades of maximum pressure campaigns would have achieved their stated objectives long ago. Instead, we see a hardening of resolve on both sides. The Iranian leadership calculates that time, geography, and asymmetrical endurance are on their side, while American policymakers feel constrained by domestic political exhaustion and the strategic necessity of not appearing weak in front of global rivals. The result is a dangerous equilibrium where neither side can win a decisive victory, yet neither can afford to back down without losing face. As we look at the global travel alerts, the heightened tensions across regional bases, and the somber return of fallen personnel, we must recognize these events not as disjointed headlines, but as the friction points of a changing global order. The old playbook of managing the Middle East through managed friction and localized deterrence is fraying under the weight of its own contradictions. When leaders speak of finishing the job or bending a regime to their will, they are using the language of a unipolar era that no longer fully reflects the messy, multipolar reality of contemporary geopolitics. The fundamental question we are left with is not simply how many more days of strikes or rounds of sanctions it will take to alter Tehran's behavior, but rather how long a superpower can sustain a strategy of kinetic management in a region that is actively slipping away from its unilateral control.